July 10th of 2022, give or take where the girls were going to go to high school or college. Like I could have told you what the next, naively, what I thought the next 50 years were going to consist of. And to have that completely pulled out from under you in the course of, 2 hours, I don't even want to plan a vacation in 6 months because I have this thing, but who knows what can happen in the next 6 months? We know what can happen in the course of a day. And so that very much was a really, really hard period for me in the first year where I remember like laughing, being sort of angry with some of our friends talking about our 40th birthday. I'm like, who knows what life's going to be like in 5 years? You guys are crazy. We can't talk about this. And then I've now, grown through, and we took a big trip last summer. We're taking another really big trip this summer and have excitement to plan something 8 months out. And so there's a growth of sort of feeling more comfortable, or the positive of looking forward to things.
Welcome everybody to the Game on Glio podcast. Today we are talking about dating. We are talking about young widowhood. We are talking about grief and loss. We are talking about this journey through new phases in our lives as we've been thrust into a future that we did not choose. I have an amazing guest on the show today that I cannot wait to bring on shortly, but I wanted to talk to all of you a little bit about what it's like to be on this journey. I haven't dove into that too much as far as being a single young widow, and I will be sprinkling that in here and there. I don't see being labeled as a widow as victimizing. I see being labeled as a widow, titled as a young widow, as a badge of honor. This is something that happened to me. It was not by choice. It was not something that I wanted. My husband and I did not leave each other. We did not choose to go separate ways. He left this earth. And for all of you that know what that journey is like, you know that as the years go on, as the years tick by, our lives become something new, something different. We aren't the same people we were when our spouses died. We become something new. We're reborn, in all honesty, into something different. And as we approach 5 years, we're about 4.5 years into Mike's death. It'll be 5 years in October. And as we approach that, I kind of look back and think about everything that I've been through and how I've grown in really great and amazing ways over the course of the last 4.5 years. The difficult part of this is not so much that I can move forward. I can grow. I can be my own person. I can take care of everything that needs to get taken care of. I can take care of me, my friends, my family. I know how to live on. The hard part for me, the challenge for me, is dating. Dating all over again. Dating at this stage in my life, trying to meet somebody or potentially meet somebody that is open to my life experience and to what I've been through. I will say that I have been open to dating lately. I realized that Mike wouldn't want me to live my life alone. He wouldn't want me to just soldier on by myself. He would want me to find somebody that could support me and that we could lean on each other and that could accept and understand this part of my journey. And so that has been challenging. I have met some people that the minute they hear that I'm a widow, they can't wrap their head around it. They can't get their head around, how can you, so you haven't healed. You must not have healed. You still talk about him. You've mentioned him. So you must not be over it. I've actually heard that. I have heard that. You must not be over it. they can't grasp that you're never really over your late partner, your late husband, your late spouse. You're never over them. It is something that constantly evolves. You never let go of the love that you had for your spouse. That never goes away. And people have had a hard time wrapping their heads around how can you love me or make room to love me if you still love him. It's challenging. It's challenging. And there's no way to really explain it. I can't help somebody through that. I can't help them navigate through that piece of it. They have to be willing to be open to something different. And that's what dating a widow is like. It's something different. It's like loving a child. You have a child, and you don't think you will ever love a child as much as you love your firstborn until you have a second child or a third child or even a fourth child. And your heart just makes room. Your heart makes room to continue to love. And that's what this is. And a lot of people have trouble understanding that. They have a lot of trouble understanding that you can make room in your heart to love more than one person. But that love is different. It looks different. It feels different. It's going to be different because I'm different. I'm different than who I was when I was 24 years old and I met my husband. My husband was the love of my life. I'm always going to love him. And I think the challenge is a lot of times what I've heard is you still talk about him once in a while. You still memorialize him in some way. That's been brought up to me a couple of times. And that's difficult for people because if I still talk about him, I must not be over him. And there's no way to really help guide somebody through that. They have to be open to seeing me for who I am. I will never be over my late husband. My love for him will always remain in my heart. I'm always going to hold a space for him. I will always have memories of him. He was in my life for 2 decades, for 20 years. So that's the challenge, I think, in being a young widow and being at this stage of our lives where we didn't anticipate having to start all over again. And everybody comes with their own journey, their own baggage, if you will. Every human being, whether it's a divorce, whether it's a death, everybody is going to come with their own journey. We're on this earth having a human experience. And that experience shapes you. But you can evolve and you can change. And if you meet the right person, the person who can sit there and say, I just want you to make a little room for me, but I'm willing to share that space with him. I want to know who he was through your eyes. I want you to talk about him once in a while. I don't want you to feel afraid to talk about him. I'm confident enough in who I am with you that if you want to bring him up, go ahead, because he was part of your life for 20 years. You have joyful memories that include him. Part of who you have become has been shaped because of the relationship you had with Mike. That is the kind of person that I want to meet. That is the kind of person that it's going to take to be in a relationship with me, with a young widow. And I've never talked about this experience before or this journey before. And until recently, it hasn't been anything to really talk about. It has taken me a really long time to get to a place where I felt comfortable enough to want to open up. And I've started to. Where this journey takes me, I don't know. But I will continue to talk about it and help you guys understand how I am growing through this new phase, this new journey. And in the meantime, we have an amazing guest who's going to be on with us today. Her name is Ellen Duncan, and she's going to be joining us after a brief word from one of our premier sponsors.
This season of the Game on Glio podcast is sponsored by GT MedTech and Gametile Therapy. Learn more at gametile.com. This season is also sponsored by IMVAX, personalized, whole tumor-derived immunotherapy. Learn more at imvax.com. This episode is sponsored by Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York. Healthcare that's a better fit for your life right now. Learn more at highmark.com or mybcbswny.com.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our guest appearance today on the show. With me, I have Ellen Duncan, who is the founder of Pineapple Partners, an independent strategic marketing and growth consultancy. She's also the mother of two beautiful girls and a young widow. And she shares a lot of her journey on her own Instagram page, which we will give all of the information for at the end of the show. So, Ellen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm honored to be here.
So let's start with what brought us to this conversation, in all honesty, and that's your late husband, Paul. He passed away about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. So tell us a little bit about going through navigating that experience and what he died from, because it wasn't this long, arduous battle.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Most has been long and arduous, but not. So Paul passed away in July of 2022. So very, very sudden. I know in your community and different, we all have different stories, all different versions of stories. I would say Paul's is one of the most sudden. That Paul was 35 when he passed away. He was always in great physical shape, was something that he loved. He was a football player through college. We met at Notre Dame, and then he played for a little piece of time in the NFL, and just really always stayed active his whole life. Had run 2 marathons in the year prior to his passing. All that to say, it was a Friday morning, beautiful Friday morning. He went out on a run with my younger daughter in the stroller and went into sudden cardiac arrest and was pronounced brain dead officially about 24 hours later. And then we kept his body sustained for a period of time so that we could donate as many of his organs as possible. So then posthumously, via obviously medical exam, we found out he had a heart condition that was undiagnosed called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy.
Oh, wow.
That we frankly had no idea. And it's one of those, we all try to go back and were there signs, were there not. You try to sort of accept what you could control, what you can't control. But yeah, very shocking to, again, this sort of wonderful human and athlete of a man that lived and did all this with his life with this, undiagnosed heart condition.
It's funny not funny. It's ironic that you mentioned this undiagnosed. I used to sit on the board of directors for the American Heart Association for our chapter up here.
Yeah.
And we talk all the time about being your own best advocate, advocating for your heart health, even when you're in really great shape, knowing warning signs, symptoms. So hearing something like this, I mean, this is something that it's a condition that I'm not extremely familiar with, even having been in that community. And this is a young man, 35 years old. That's young. That is very young.
Very young.
To
and
have
5 a month before, so I mean, barely 35.
Yeah, I mean that's so he hadn't even gone through like a full year of being 35. He was technically he had just turned 35. To have that suddenly happen, yeah, I mean, it's hard not to go down a rabbit hole of, did we miss something? Was there something he was struggling with that we didn't see? Did he have trouble breathing? Were there palpitations? Like, I can imagine. I mean, I think every person who has had an experience, especially when it is more sudden, was there something that I missed that I could have identified before?
Definitely. And there's have been tons of those moments. I remember even in that 24-hour period where we were still in the hospital, or everyone's sort of pulling for answers, and the doctors, and it's such a horrible. And then at one point someone said, did he talk about being tired? And I was like, I mean, we're always tired. We're 2 working parents and trying to do everything. And so I was like, yes, he talks about being tired, but it does, you're trying to find these signs. But at some point, which I'd say is in this, almost 3-year journey, I've definitely come to a point now of, acceptance isn't the right word for it, but there's no semblance of we could have, just is what happened.
And I think that's important to kind of I think that's important to stress that it would be very easy for us, because even with my husband's battle with brain cancer, some of the earlier symptoms that we could have used as an indicator were symptoms that you can have just as daily stressors in life. And so it's very hard for people to, um, you have to be able to separate so that you don't become too obsessed with, oh my God, is it this? Oh my God, oh, I feel anxious doesn't mean it's this. We have to find that balance.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to stress and to point out that yes, some of these signs can be symptomatic of something larger or more serious going on, but at the same time, we could feel, I mean, I'm perimenopausal right now. Yes, everybody, I'm saying it because we need to humanize this word.
Mhm.
I am perimenopausal. I am exhausted all of the freaking time. All of the time. I am fatigued. I am tired. It is part of this process. That doesn't mean that there is some massive underlying. So you
Yeah.
need to find that balance and trust your gut and be able to say,
And it is such a balance of where you can be proactive. I mean, HCM is typically genetic. Paul did not. We were able to. There was some of his blood remaining with the medical examiner, and so we were able to get that genetically screened. But we are proactively getting the girls screened so there's things you can still do with the knowledge you have. But
yeah,
and then there have been others that have said things that times resonate, sometimes don't. But where if he had known, would he have ever played football at Notre Dame? Would he have met me? Would he,
yeah.
and so there's just where life has its twists and turns and
It happens the way it's supposed to happen,
yep,
whether, yeah. Yeah, and I've done the same thing. If there were any mild changes to Mike's life before he had met me, or if anything else had changed, we may not have had the life that we had had up until that
exactly.
end.
Yep.
So, and I wouldn't change that. I wouldn't have wanted to risk that for anything.
Yep.
So, yeah, I get that. So,
Agreed.
tell us a little bit about Paul. What was he like before,
He's, I would say he's one of the good ones, for sure. He was just, has a son, a brother. He has three sisters, and just that upbringing. His comes from a wonderful, large family in Georgia. Had really strong faith, but just loved to live life to the fullest. Was such a great partner, husband, father, friend. Just enjoyed every day. He worked really hard. He loved his career, but he also, there was a quote when he was in college, in like the local South Bend newspaper, that someone said, "No one can relax like Paul Duncan can." Like he just loved to hang out, put his feet up, play around a golf, and just really was a true partner and champion of mine, which to still to this day, every minute almost impacts my life, that he was so supportive and continues to be in the way he can of my career, of the girls, of believing in all the big crazy ideas I come up with. And so he just was wonderful, wonderful partner and just fun guy. Also I'm very competitive, and he was a great match for that. Paul and his commitment to beating me in things is, I grew up, my family are big Scrabble players. And so I have grown up, one of my sort of dorky anecdotes is that I know all the 2-letter words in the Scrabble dictionary. And so we met when I was 21, he was 23, and it took him about 6 years, but 6 years in, he started to consistently beat me in Scrabble. And
6 years is a long time.
He became the master at some point, but that was he with it though. He didn't give up for like 6 years, and then he finally started beating me all the time.
I love Mike and I loved Scrabble. We actually got like one of those high-end Scrabble
Mm-hmm.
boards with like
Yep.
the clear glass, and it
Yep.
rotated on
Yep.
a thing. And
Love it.
so, yeah, we loved. I can't say though that I was very good at the 2-letter words. I would not say that I am that
Yeah.
practiced.
That's one of the skills, but it's been fun. The girls really have taken up with the Duncan side. We play a lot of cards, and my girls and I play cards all the time. And so there's a lot of the day-to-day stuff that still lives on.
What qualities in the girls do you see where, something happens and you're like, "Oh God, that is so Paul."
Oh my gosh, so many things. I always say he lives and breathes all the time here. Everything from, I would say, giving me a hard time and keeping me humble. The girls they call it their responsibility that they
Yeah.
took from dad. And then just their definitely their work ethic for both the girls. They are really, in a constructive way, sort of hard on themselves and have high expectations of themselves, but they want to do well, they want to work hard and have that ethic there. And then also just in the goofiness and having fun, especially my younger daughter Sloane, is you can see a lot in the way her mannerisms and where she tries to make people laugh. So
Yeah.
there definitely lives and breathes within both of them.
So being now 2.5, almost 3 years in, what are some obstacles that have come up for you that you wouldn't have expected to be obstacles at this stage, at this point in the journey after his death?
I think one of the biggest, I would say, ongoing obstacles is, I find it I call it two different things: finding your footing, but also sort of your self-identity in it. I feel like for the first definitely year and a half, maybe even going into 2 years, it was, sometimes I talk about sort of the scarlet letter, but it was just such a defining, and it still is, but just the almost defining factor of who I was at that moment in time, to a certain degree, the girls' lives, but that's, their journey. It's just, it's this like all encompassing sort of, cloud to a certain degree around us. And I think for me, now heading into, almost the 3rd-year anniversary, it's feeling like this ability to sort of step outside of that cloud, but still then find your footing in, that still is a huge part and a big defining factor, but it's not like the all-encompassing defining factor. And I think finding it's sort of like this comfort level with that you're not leaving Paul behind or leaving any of that behind, but you're not, like, it's not the only defining factor of who you are now.
Yeah. Do you find that it's hard to shape who you are now? Who is Ellen at almost 3 years in, now that, we've gotten past the 1 year, the 2nd year is kind of shaking off the idea that he's going to come back, that instinct that, okay, this isn't, okay, now we know it's real. This is what it is now. I mean, that was kind of how it was for me. For some people, it happens quicker, slower.
Yep.
Going into 3 years, and I'm about 4.5 years in. So going into 3 years was when it really hit home that, okay, he's never coming back. It's sunk in now. Now I have to figure out how to navigate knowing that. And then after that, it became, who is Shannon now without, like, who am I
Yep.
going forward? Who is this new version of me? What does that look like? What does it feel like?
Yep.
Are you finding some sense of that?
Yeah. So I'll back up a little bit. I heading into this, sometimes like they sort of blur together. The 1-year anniversary of Paul's passing, his birthday was June 18th. And so what would have been his 36th birthday was also Father's Day. Just an incredibly, we were 1 month away from the 1-year anniversary, just incredibly, incredibly, understandably emotional, few days. And I had this moment of clarity then. So this was 11 months after his passing, that I did not want to be at that physically sort of same place a year from now. And I sort of had this, like, the road, big two choices, where I was like, I know we could stay where we were living. We had wonderful, wonderful community, friends that are like family nearby in Georgia. And I just like, I could do this and there wouldn't be anything wrong, but I just felt like I had to physically reset our lives in order to even figure out what it would look like to move forward. And so I made the decision then. It took about 5 months but then we relocated to the Philadelphia area, which is where I grew up. So all of that to say is, having sort of taken myself out of the physical life of the home, the school, the country club, the neighbors that we were in, that again was all wonderful. And then physically resetting has really enabled me to take some time to, or be able
Almost
to
to wipe the slate clean, it sounds like,
it
kinda
really
start all
did.
over. Yeah.
Again, it's, I know, like, everyone obviously knows our story, and I think a lot of my great friends I've made up here say, like, they feel like they know Paul. It's all, there's a portrait of him right here. Like, he's such a part of our lives in us, but it's a totally different, like, we physically had to do that.
Yeah.
I think wise. And again, it wouldn't have been the wrong choice. It just, I sometimes have said it to people that I was always going to be living a version of the life that Paul and I would have been living. And like, I had to start to live a life that he's not physically here. So how can I build something built on top of that, but build something else?
I think that's really brave. And it's got me thinking a tiny bit, just because I've thought that many times, and I haven't. I still live in the house that we shared and
Yep.
in the neighborhood that we had, only because I don't know where I would go. I'm
Yep.
not sure what would be the right next step
Yep.
in that way. But I've had moments where I've thought, I would like to step outside of this.
Yep.
I just have no idea how that would look at the moment, or where that would look,
Yep.
what would feel like home for me alone.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that's interesting that you bring, and it's brave. It's really brave. And this is part of how we navigate
Exactly.
when these things happen to us. Everybody has their own journey and their own process of moving through it. And I've heard so many stories of how everybody finds a way to get through and navigate that grief journey for themselves. And these are all the tools that we give to everybody else, so that
Right.
they know that, okay, if I feel this way or this way or this way, it's normal. It's normal to want to do this or that.
But it's
And
not necessarily right or wrong. There's no right choice because none of us chose
there's no
this.
manual.
And I think it's also knowing that just because Ellen chose to move a year and a half in, but then
Yep.
Shannon is still, and then someone else moved 3 months. Like it's just everyone that
Has their
moment.
own.
I always say, at least for our journey, has been if it feels right.
Yep.
I said two things. I had a lot of strong opinions of pregnancy and sort of like happy mom, happy baby. If that means, whatever, not obviously anything extreme, but if it meant having a cup of coffee or doing something, or like, as long as I felt like it was healthy enough, and I've really sort of channeled that a lot in this unexpected journey of that. If I am doing something that I feel like is right
Mm-hmm.
for my own mental health, physical health, just emotional health, that's going to help the girls. And so that's where you have this like mindset, even of like, what's going to be the right next thing frankly, it's sometimes prioritizing myself because they live so much off of whatever energy.
Yeah.
I'm giving.
It reminds me of, I actually think I posted, I think it was 6 months or a year after Mike had died.
Mm.
And for me, it was starting my own business, starting the podcast, kind of diving into helping others. But there was a movie, and there was a line that you just said that totally brings me back to that. It's from the second movie in Frozen, which all kids will love.
Yep.
But there's a moment where I think it's Anya. I think it's the younger sister, where she's going to find. They have to, I don't know, bring two communities together, and it's very confusing. And she's talking to the soldier in the woods, and she's feeling very lost and very confused. And he looks at her and he's like, "All you can do is the next right thing."
Yep.
And that line always, it just stuck with me, because that really is all this journey is all you can do is the next right thing in the moment that's in front of you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, what challenges do you feel there are to being a young widow, especially a young widow with young children? I mean, I mentioned this in the intro going into this episode with you, that for me, being a young widow is not victimization. It is not something to shy away from or hide from. It's almost like a badge of honor, because I'm proud of the fact that I had this amazing journey and chapter of my life. It didn't end the way that I would want it to end, but that I don't want to shy away from that word just because. But it comes with its own set of challenges, because being a young widow or widower is different than somebody who becomes widowed in their later golden years.
Yep. I mean, tremendous amount of challenges, as you noted. I would say a few things. One being this, I would say, opportunity or challenge is, and you hear this a lot, within grief communities and young widow communities, is no one knew how big of a community this was. I think that's one of the things that continues to in a heartbreaking way, but surprised me every day. So I've, as you noted early in the episode, a little bit haphazardly and then with more purpose, started to share our story via social media. And so with that platform, every day sort of are connected with someone with a different story or a friend of a friend. And you're like, just, I remember saying early on, like, oh my gosh, who knew with all these spouses that died in their 30s and 40s? Like,
Yeah.
what? And it's like, then you hear other people's story. I remember woman I played tennis with, right after it happened, she, was in her 60s and she's like, oh, this happened in my 30s. And she's like, I had it just, everyone's life has so many chapters that sometimes you just are unaware of. But I'd say even with that size of a community and sometimes shared experiences, I think the majority of us, my experience specifically, is that even with the network of family, friends, professional network, most people hadn't seen this happen, at least to the degree or the version of Paul passing. And that's where there's, I think, just this, and I try to, sympathize with them, and there's no one knows what to expect from me or the girls or how to, and so that's just this, everyone sort of navigating it blindly, including myself, I think continues to be a challenge. The other is really, and this almost goes back to what we talked about, of the sort of self-identity. I took and still take, but so much pride in being a partner and a wife. And definitely Paul and I mean, marriage is, everyone is married, husband knows it's not easy, but worked really, really hard at our relationship. And I'd say it was a truly, like, as a wonderful partnership. And that has always been, continues to be such a challenge for me. I always thought that was the story that was going to be our story to tell, how Paul was so supportive of me and my career and doing just, and those parts of that sort of self-identity going away have been really, continues to be, I would love to identify as a partner and a wife and be able to do that. And that, because I was really good at it. And that definitely a challenge. The other parts of it are, I'd say, you just talked about victimization. I articulate this sometimes, but probably not as publicly, as I definitely have a mentality of don't be a victim. And so I really strive to, and I've always been like this even prior to Paul passing, but just to have a positive mindset. And that's, I think, oftentimes, and I still experience this even to this date, of a lot of people sort of want to feel negative and want to assume that you feel negative and have a negative outlook. And, oh my gosh, how could this happen? Such a beautiful family. It's so horrible. And it's like, just people's initial and ongoing negative reactions are a challenge, because it's like, I shouldn't have to make you feel more positive about this horrible thing that happened to my family. And so it's like this strange challenge of trying to get, people out of the negative, I guess.
I think a piece of that too comes with a lack of understanding, just in general. And I don't disagree with you. I think that was one of the shocking things for me, was seeing the numbers of how many other young widows and widowers just in the United States, not even taking into consideration Canada or other countries, the thousands, the sheer volume of young under the age of 50 widows and widowers there are in the United States. And so, but even with all of those numbers, it's just not something, it's just a taboo topic. It's not something that everybody talks about. And it's not a comfortable thing so this idea of trying to navigate, oh, if she doesn't feel negative anymore, if she doesn't look miserable anymore, she must not have loved him enough. And I think there's that stigma that kind of comes along with it. And then you internalize that, well, should I not be should I not be searching for joy and like happiness? But that's part of the healing process. And it's interesting that it fascinated me the minute you said you were good at being a wife and a partner. And I had just said this to somebody the other day, that I took a lot of pride in being Mike's wife, his partner, his teammate in all things. And for 20 years, we were very good at it. We worked our butts off at that relationship. And I was very good at it. And I do miss that. And I haven't heard, you're probably one of the you might even only be the second person that I've heard out of a number of people that I've talked to in this phase of their life that have said that piece, that
Yep.
they really identified, they loved being that wife, that partner. And I miss that too.
Yeah, we worked, I mean, through have great examples of marriages in our lives, our parents and, friends and family. And I think one of the things you often heard from advice and obviously is that, you have to put your spouse first. And I think that, again, was such an interesting thing for me. Even I remember talking to a friend about, that like sort of priority and whether, if you're a person of faith or not, but it's like, like Jesus, spouse, kids, others, whatever people's orders of that, but then self is sort of the bottom. And had this sort of, I think this might have been in therapy at some point, but I was like, I knew I needed to sort of replace Paul with myself in order to be the best person for the girls, as I was talking about before. But it was, I think that's where you just, we were married for 10 years together for about 12 and a half. And, you just said for the period of time you're putting your person first, and that's a different investment.
It's this choice of constantly showing up and choosing that person every single day.
Yep.
And that's what a healthy relationship looks like.
Yep.
It's finding that balance. So
the other part of it that's funny though, more that I am a pretty disciplined person, and Paul was too, in terms of a lot of different aspects of our life, but a lot of sort of task management and all that to say that we had this very defined list that we went back to on a quarterly basis of sort of who was accountable for what in the house, the kids, etc. And so a lot of people knew that this existed because I would share it with people for their own households. And so it was really helpful for the first, 6 months to a year, where everyone just sort of were like, give us the Excel sheet and we'll just reassign things that were Paul's and yours out to us. In times now that we're, in a whole different life chapter. And of course we still have people that are tremendously helpful, but I'm not, don't have as much day-to-day task help. I'll hear Paul in my head just go, CL, it really wasn't that hard to make the lunches and take the trash out.
Oh God. Well, it's like, it's not that it's hard. It's just that I don't want to do it. So what's something hopeful that has come out of this for you? Something that has surprised you, that where it was it unexpectedly felt joyful or good?
There's a few things that come to mind. I'll say the ones that immediately came. One for me is I've always, not always, but have developed through my upbringing, and then especially sort of formative in my high school and college years, a very strong Christian faith. And my daughter's faith was there. And I mean, they were so young when everything happened, but they were 4 and 6. Now they're 7 and 9. They just have such a tremendous belief and faith in heaven. And it's just the most beautiful thing to witness. And they're so matter of fact about it. And they tell anybody and well, no, Dad's in heaven and he's doing this. And and it's just like a wonderful, just like this beautiful, just way that they manage through their grief, but they're understanding of what's happened and where Dad is and all that. I'd say that's just one piece of hope in that. The other is that I think having in our story being out there, and sometimes people find out about it, they've known about it because of social media or they find out, but is that there's we all know, or I say like everyone experiences loss, maybe not as traumatic at the age of 30. I was 33 when it happened and all that, but everyone's life has loss, grief, hardships. And I've been able to sort of in friendships, whether friendships people I knew for a while or especially have since developed friendships, sort of break through the BS where my life is by no means perfect. And not that it was when Paul was here either, but it just has helped this spirit of authenticity. I think with people, we're like, okay, I don't have to pretend that everything. I know that, people I think can relate in a way or feel ability to be more transparent and authentic, which has been
genuine.
Yeah. Genuine, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not sort of this air of everything's perfect.
Right. So we're going to transition a little bit because you also own a business, and we mentioned it at the top of the show. So you run your own company. You've got these 2 very young girls. How do you balance it? You're a single parent and you're trying to manage all of these things. And I can identify, I mean, I don't have children, but I can identify with this need to balance, at least with the finances, the home, the mortgage, the yard work, picking up the slack on all of these things that I didn't have to do before, and balance my own health, my emotional health, and my business
Yep.
that I have to run and maintain. How do you find that balance?
It changes on a day-to-day, week for sure, hour to hour sometimes. The definitely sort of I plan with intention. I did this when Paul was here too. I mean, but of what I'm very sort of aware of what, I talk about like drivers and drains, what makes me happy, what gives me energy, who I want to be present with, spend time with. And I work with people and clients that I hope are always drivers. So to that point, like the work is not, it's a job. Sometimes people are like, well, my brother loves to say, would you do it if you were not being paid? No, but I want to control to not have work be a drain. So that is tremendously helpful. Again, it's coming from a point of hard work, but also a little bit of privilege. And I've been able to have these opportunities that then gave me the opportunity to do what I do now. So all that say, there's the other part of it is if you have the ability, whether paid or family or friends, is I do accept help. I do outsource as much as I can. I think everybody has to, whatever that looks like for yourself, but that helps. I know that I'm much better spent working on a marketing strategy for a client than sometimes doing traditional household work. So I was like, I'm doing this work so I can have someone help me do the other work. So all those things that just help with the balance. So definitely taking the help where you can, outsourcing for help if possible. And then honestly, prioritizing the things that I know will give me the energy and make happy. So a really interesting observation for me has been in Atlanta. I played a lot of tennis. So we lived in Atlanta prior to moving here. For the first 18 months living here, was sort of like all in on work, just getting the girls settled, wasn't playing tennis. And just in the last 3 months have started playing tennis again. And it's been a game changer. And of course, I loved doing this. I always talked about tennis being a great outlet after Paul had passed because I could be social, but I didn't feel like I had to sit at a happy hour and answer people's questions. I could interact, but still be around people.
Yeah.
And I was like, I knew this. I knew that this was a great thing to do this. And so now it's been a great, adding that back into my life. So finding those things that give you the energy, and then, then having, I think the other part of balancing it is having the right, I shouldn't say the right, but having good people in your life that, even if it's not your spouse. I have some really, really tremendous friendships that I feel like I can lean in, and they keep me, I'd say, balanced and ask me the hard questions sometimes when they need to be asked.
We need good friends like that are willing to push us a little bit when we don't want, but need it. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, I mean, even with the business, do you feel running your own business do you feel that it's been kind of like a godsend, to have that? Or do you feel that there have been a lot of challenges with trying to maintain that well?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely a godsend. Sometimes I haven't said it like this in a while, but I had this a few times in similar conversations where I always, would never hope or think that this was ever part of God's plan. But it's just amazing to me that I had already founded the company about 1.5 years before Paul passed. So in November of 2020, I left. So I had worked for the Coca-Cola company for about 6 years or so, left Coca-Cola and founded my independent consulting firm. Paul was all in. I sort of pitched him with this business plan. We had my goal was to match my Coca-Cola compensation in year 1 and then sort of see what we could do from there. And he was so supportive. He was fantastic. And so did that, figure out the business, and then obviously 1.5 years. And so I was able, when he passed, to I didn't take a ton of time off of, I probably didn't work for 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. But having something that I felt comfortable going back into and was in my own control. I loved my career at Coca-Cola. It's given me such a foundation to what I do today.
Yeah.
But if I had still been in a version of the role at Coke, I would have a team of 30 to 50 people. There's just it's the day-to-day accountability.
Yeah.
It's so different that it just continues to be such a tremendous blessing that I always say I work very much full time, but it is in my control. So
Yep.
that's so helpful.
Yeah, I do think that there's an autonomy with it, that just provides you this ability to, especially on days, if I'm feeling overwhelmed or something has come up that's kind of triggered me, I can take a step back. I don't have to respond or, answer to a boss or a manager. I don't have to worry about people underneath. I can just say, okay, this is what's going on. I'm in control of the day to day and how that looks. So, yeah, I do think that for as stressful as it can be, it is also a huge blessing to run our own businesses, I think. Yeah. So, where you were 6 months ago, or where you were within those first 6 months, I should say. So those first 6 months to a year after Paul died, obviously things look very different now than they did in those
Mhm.
first 6 months. How do you feel you've grown? Like I have a tendency to take a step back and just I look at where I was in those first 6 months, that first year, and then I remember, and I have a journal of those that first year, and I look back at some of my thoughts and some of how I was feeling, and then I look at where I am now, and I can't believe the growth and how the feelings have changed, how I have changed
Yeah.
in this time. So, how do you feel you've grown in the last couple of years?
I think there's one sort of grown, and I'd say even whether it would have happened sort of immaturing in general, but is the appreciation of sort of rest and intentional just time to be with people. Paul was tremendous at pushing us to do that when he was here, but I now don't. Have I've grown to just appreciate, like, just have time to rest and take care of yourself, be with
Mhm.
people, not feel like you always what are you doing next. I would say versus the first 6 months, I had a developed, I would say, in the first 6 months to a year, and then have since sort of grown through it, but is the sort of fear of the future.
Yeah.
I couldn't. It still gives me anxiety even saying it now. Like I one of the things I've said over time is, in July 10th of 2022, give or take where the girls were going to go to high school or college, like I could have told you what the next,
Yeah.
naively what I thought the next 50 years were going to consist of, and to have that completely pulled out from under you in the course of 2 hours, it I remember. So that then in context of me also being this, like, it's sort of a little bit intense planner. I remember
Mhm.
saying there's one like, I don't even want to plan a vacation in 6 months because I have this thing, but who knows what can happen in the next 6 months? We know what can happen in the course of a day. And so that very much was a really, really hard period for me in the first year, where I remember like laughing, being sort of angry with some of our friends talking about our 40th birthday. I'm like, who knows what life's going to be like in 5 years? You guys are crazy. We can't talk about this. And then I've now, grown through and am now planning. We took a big trip last summer. We're taking another really big trip this summer, and have excitement to plan something 8 months out. And that,
Mm.
so there's a growth of sort of feeling more comfortable, or hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think comfortable and not fearful
Hopeful.
of the what ifs in a negative
Yeah.
way, but really the positive of looking forward to things.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because I do think that it's a trigger
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people that have gone through this process. And I think that that's something that's pretty mainstream. As we talk about how everybody's, way through this process is different. I think that's something that's pretty mainstream, is that there's that trigger, that sense of, you know, how do we know? How do we even be able to look forward to something, when we don't know what's going to happen or what's around the next corner?
Yeah.
And I think part of that is it puts us in the present moment. When
Yeah.
something like this happens, it really forces you to be in the present moment. But it's also a gift to be able to get excited about something again. And that is something that I miss. I've taken some trips and I have done some things for myself singularly, and with some friends, but I do miss having those moments of being able to plan something with somebody and being able to have something to look forward to, you know, 5 months from now, 6 months from now, or during the holidays next year. It's a gift to have that kind of hope.
Mm-hmm. And that sort of confidence in it.
Yeah.
The other side of it is that I've always been also sort of impulsive or sort of a say yes person, but that's definitely gone to the extreme with this life journey. And so now it's oftentimes like, even to that example, I'll have friends that say like, we should do this for our 40th, or I'm like, let's just do it for our 37th birthday. We've been waiting 3 years. Listen, it's like, okay,
why wait that long? So, well, I mean, as we talk about, celebrating things and joyful things and impulse things, and what has your experience been for dating, and being this single woman kind of in that pool again of, have you had the experience of?
Yeah. So I have had the experience of dating. I can talk a little bit about that. I will say just one anecdotal going into it is I've, through my social media platform and just friendships developed, was talking to a widower friend of mine recently, and he's probably about 2 years, maybe a year and a half in, but he says the first question everyone asks him is, are you dating anyone? And I like, no one asks me that. And so it's so interesting where I was just like a little bit of like male, female. I was like
I do think that's different. It is. Yes, I agree 100%.
So I have been, I would say within the first 9 months was open to, I think I remember saying to someone at some point, like, I just want to hang out with an adult that wasn't part of my life when Paul was here.
Yeah.
And like, just feel like starting to like, I don't build the muscles right way, but I just had this need to like, just do something a little bit different. It wasn't like I wanted to get into a necessary relationship. And then it's so different. I guess I'll answer it, and this is probably gonna be roundabout ways, but I met Paul when I had just turned 21. And then we were together until I was 33, about to turn 34. And when you're dating, whether you're in your 30s or 40s, irrespective of your life before that, it's just a very different dating experience than dating when you're 19 or 20 or 21. And so I very much, as soon as I even met someone for a coffee, realized there's so much out there that I was naive to of terminology and different. And I have a brother that's single in his late 30s, and he just, I was naive to the degree of the thing, like just different terms people use and all. And so all that to say, I have had the blessing of meeting some wonderful, wonderful people. I've had 2, I would say, relationships in this period, and have learned a lot. I think I have a tremendous amount of hope that I think I said at the very beginning that, and Paul, this always will make me cry. Like Paul really, there's this song, The Good Ones by Gabby Barrett, that I love. It like really was one of the good ones, but I have a lot of hope and faith that there are other good ones out there. And so just having hope that the right one will come at the right time and it'll make work. But I also, I would say, have gone through, to your point, have witnessed and seen other young widows, remarry, and everyone's different timeline. And there comes, and I'll say this for anyone listening, that we all go through, I think we all, but I have, and know from others, that you see it and you're like, oh my gosh, that happened within 18 months for that person, or 3 years for that person. And I'm sitting here, 3 months away from the 3 year, not in a relationship. And I'm like, but I think I've really gotten to a point where like, that's okay. I have family, I have my girls, I have wonderful friends. And so just having this sort of faith of focusing where I am right now, sort of focusing on continue to build our life. And then if and when it happens, it'll be the right time versus not, where that is. But open to it. And I think that's the other, is taking that step whenever it makes sense for anyone on the widow journey, is to just say you're open to it. It has been, I think, an easier way versus like, I'm wanting to date, or that's been an easy phrase. I think and that's like just a little tactic for people, but when people ask, and then you're not having to give a lot of details or what you're looking for or not looking for, just say, I'm open to meeting someone if it makes sense, and then see what happens.
I think that's a good tool, honestly, to give, listeners, to give viewers that might be on this journey, is that you're open to it. And I've struggled with that. So that helps me because, you do feel like you have to kind of explain, what it's been or where you are. And I think it makes it easier to just say, I'm open to it. If the right person comes along, or if, and willing to talk to people, to
Exactly.
get to know people, regardless or irregardless of where it might go.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to want to shelter our hearts and want to kind of protect, um, going through that hurt again, or having re-grief happen
Yep.
again. It's not easy to, and I was the same way. I was 24 when I met Mike. So we grew up through our previous relationship, through
Mhm.
our marriage. We grew up with each other because we were all young.
Yep.
So we were finding ourselves as we were navigating that relationship. And it is different. We've all had human experiences. We're in our 30s and 40s now. So you're at different phases of your life at this point. And
There's a
so,
acceptance of that has
yeah.
been helpful. I've met people that are uh, divorced with kids, or
Mhm.
widow themselves, or 42 and just have never been married because of their life. But I think there's also one of the things I've talked with other widow and widowers about is that this is, hopefully no one takes this negative, but I've talked about like where sometimes we as widow and widowers can come into relationships sort of like main character because it's like this big story, but everyone has so much life as
Yeah.
well. And that's where something that I have a good friend that is in his early 40s that has never been married. And he's often just reminds me like that everyone has a ton, not even good and bad baggage, just, but brings a lot of life once you're in your 30s
Mhm.
and 40s that comes into a relationship. It's so different than when you were 21 or 22. And so it's just sort of like reframing your mindset.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, we're human, we're beings having a human experience on this earth. And during that time, there's going to be things that have shaped you into the person that you become when you meet somebody else. And so I think, the big takeaway for me is being able to say we're open to something when we're ready, that we're open to whatever comes along. And I think that also opens up the door to being able to allow ourselves to say, to admit to ourselves that I am open to
yeah,
this. That, I know for me, one of the most important things was being able to say, I can admit that I don't want to be alone for the rest of my life. Am I okay being alone if I have to be? If that's just the path that is put in front of me, then yes.
yeah,
I'm moving forward. I'm doing my own thing. But do I want to be alone? No. Do I
yeah,
want a partner again? Yes. Did I love being a wife? Absolutely. And that took a long
mm,
time for me to even be willing to admit to
yep,
myself
yep,
that was something that was really important to me. And I don't want to be in my 50s or 60s and just doing my own thing and soldiering on. I don't want, if I don't have to be, I don't want to be. Can I do it? Absolutely. Will I? Yes. But I'm open, and I've admitted that I would love for love to find me again. It's going to look different. It's
exactly.
going to feel different.
And there's different, going to look different, feel different, be different. I remember somebody, this is, I won't, somebody's stopping me that, people say things that you're like, just put that back into your mouth. But he's tall and this big, muscular man. And this guy stopped me on the street that knew Paul. And he goes, we're just on a walk in a park. And he goes, I've been thinking about you. I think you should just like end up with a really small guy. So it's so different. I'm just like, what? What are you? Thank you for your input. And moving on. Like,
You gotta love what people. It's you. There's just interest. I wish I could I need to start documenting every time somebody says something.
just like, where did that? But I think only other thing I would say in terms of is the experiences I've had. Like I said, I've had sort of these two, they have not continued on, but these two relationships, one shorter, one longer, but they were very open and accepting of Paul. And I think that is, I shouldn't say it's critical. Can't step in everyone's shoes, but
Yeah,
like your late spouse partner should never be like is a part of you. And I think
yeah,
and I'm sure that was a lot of work for them in the background, but that comfort with me, whether my daughter, like people that he is a huge part of our life. And that I think
yeah.
is something that you shouldn't, I would say, sacrifice.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because it's finding that balance. A new relationship, a new partner. It is going to be something new. It's something different. Nobody will ever compare to spouse, to your late spouse. But it does take a little bit of work because, and I remember somebody saying to me, I tried to go on a couple of dates with this one individual and they said, "Oh, so Traphagen is not your maiden name." And I'm like, no, it's my married name. And they're like, "Oh, I would have thought you would have gone back to your maiden name." And I'm like, "Well, why would I do that?"
Mm.
And they're like, "Well, because they're not here anymore." And it made them uncomfortable. And they said, "Well, if you got married again, would you take your new spouse's name?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I would hyphenate because I will never." I remember somebody saying to me once, and this has stuck with me and it will always stick with me. You die twice in life. When you physically shed your body, when you die and you move from this plane of existence. And the second time you die is the last time somebody speaks your name.
Mm.
So, and that resonated with me because we should always want to remember the
Definitely.
people that are important to us in our lives. We should always want to carry their memory forward. And that's what this journey is really about. It's they didn't choose to leave.
Mm.
They left. They were forced to leave this plane of existence. They were forced to leave this earth, but they didn't choose to leave. They didn't choose to leave us, and we didn't choose to leave them. And so whoever comes into our lives that is a part of this journey is that they will always be a part of our memory. They will always hold a place in our heart. And whoever comes into our lives, they need to be open to that experience while also understanding that there's no threat to you. It shouldn't be threatening or a comparison in any way, shape, or form. It is just, this was a huge part of my life, our lives. And we didn't choose to walk away from that. And so we will carry their memory with us to honor them because they didn't choose to leave this earth. They were taken from this earth way too soon. And so we should never be forced to forget them just because.
Yep. Totally agree.
Yeah. Well, Ellen, thank you so much. I mean, to have you share your journey and your story, I always feel it's so important to bring on guests that can enlighten us with what they've gone through, no matter how the spouse was taken, no matter the form that the grief has shaped, the story that's told. It's so important to bring on different perspectives because it helps all of us. I mean, I know I learn each and every time I have another widow or widower who on the show. I take away something from it. I learn from it. I grow from it. And so it means a lot to be able to have you share your story and your journey and where you are currently, because I think it's empowering to so many others.
Thank you. And thank you for everything you're doing in this platform, and just happy to be a part of it.
So where can people find you if they want to learn more about your story or follow along your journey, or if they want to reach out, for marketing needs?
Sure. So Pineapple Partners, we do a lot of marketing, growth strategy. I'm a fractional chief marketing officer for a couple organizations, so always happy to talk with anyone there. But then we share our personal sort of story on Instagram at Pineapple Ellen. So I'm sure we can link it, but
Yep.
definitely follow along. And sometimes I sort of ebb and flow with the amount of content, but definitely sharing just as our life continues to evolve.
And for everybody who's watching or listening, I will absolutely have all of their information on the website. I will have Ellen's bio. I will have hyperlinks to everything. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us today and being with us. And with that, everybody, we will be right back. You've been listening to the Game on Glio podcast, the podcast that is designed to educate, advocate, and tell the real stories of those walking the journey of brain cancers such as glioblastoma and grief and loss. Like what you hear? Share us with others. Follow us on Instagram at Game on Glio Podcast, Facebook at Game on Glio, or visit our website or YouTube channel. You can find us anywhere podcasts are played.